Good morning. Back here to contemplate the Catholic Church crisis and solution. Continue to endeavor the question of how to. And this today is a little bit more of a reflective question. Or I kind of thinking about it in terms of what I would call getting away with it. There's an article this morning online about Trump, and I'd had much the same thoughts as the author. Should we be surprised that this political figure, who had 12 or 13 sexual abuse, rape allegations, been dodging the tax law since his youth, and so on and so forth, the whole gambit of issues that he's got away with, and now he's just gotten away with avoiding any kind of accountability to the public. So that said, I was thinking about that. What a Trump, what a Kobe Bryant, what a Patrick Mahoney, the Archbishop of L.A. What do these powerful, popular people have in common? And they all have a sexual abuse in their past. The bishop being one where he shuffled priests around, so essentially he becomes complicit in abuse, but on a clerical, power structure. Kobe has one issue. Maybe he had more, I don't know. And Trump, who's essentially a serial abuser. And I often think, well, what if... anyway, so what they all have in common is they have power. They have power. And in case of Trump and even Kobe, probably even the bishop, they have money. And I was reflecting about that, and that's what this article referred to, power, money, and getting away with it. Which just galls people like me that believe in these Christian principles of essentially you're not going to get away with it. And it reminded me of a book I read years ago, which my book club panned. Actually hated it, but you have to read it in context. It's a John Dominic Crossan book. He's a biblical scholar, so he writes in a scholarly, with scholarly kind of oversight. And in this book, Jesus: A Revolutionary Biography, he spends the book making the case that Jesus was standing up against the powers to be, whether that was the Roman Empire and all of his commensurate poverty-ridden life, with statements against the power at hand, the Roman power, the even Jewish hierarchical power at hand. And so he sets this whole case out and displaying, going back and biblically kind of reaching and grabbing these nuggets. But the whole story, the whole book goes to this whole arc of Jesus' life as a life against power. And for commensurate or shared wealth, shared power, it's an antithesis to the Trump, Kobe, Mahoney archetype. So we are, if we choose to endeavor the Christian call and take heed of Cresson's insights into the life of Jesus from a biblical historian's perspective, we are called to ask, well, how do we stand up for the powerless? And that's why the whole church crisis, abuse crisis, is so important in the sense of the powerless. And here are the victims, and in some ways the laity. Although I've made a point before, I think the laity is somewhat complicit, but they need to be empowered, and they're not. So, and then you take someone like Trump. I mean, there's books that are going to be written about how he is antithetical to the Christian message, which is kind of interesting because there's such a large group of even Catholics and evangelicals that wrapped themselves around Trump and mostly around the issue of abortion, which I somewhat see that's a powerless sector that needs a voice. However, they tend to drop the ball when it comes to the powerless and the refugee and the powerless and the minority and powerlessness of women in some cases. So it's not a very consistent moral stand, in my opinion, but so there is something in common with those three: the bishop, the ball player, and the bungling president. And they get away with it. Probably to Kobe's credit, at least he, in some ways, seemed to have found some remorse in his actions, but I don't really want to comment on his moral character because I don't know him, but certainly the other two have voluminous documentation of their neglect, malpractice, malbehavior, character. So, if you want to know what Cresson's conclusion is, it's a very, very telling, and it's in the last page of his book here, where, after Jesus living this simple shared meal, and the whole effort of Christianity to get its footing and become a religion, and Paul's efforts to create communities and so forth. There's a little footnote here in the life of Constantine. Constantine was a Roman ruler in the 3rd century, or was it the 2nd century? Anyway, he's the one that adopted Christianity as a state religion for Rome. But in this, he says, detachments of bodyguards and troops surrounded the entrance of the palace with drawn swords, and through the midst of them the men of God proceeded without fear into the innermost imperial apartments, in which some were the emperor's companions at table, while others reclined on couches arranged on either side. One might have thought that the picture of Christ's kingdom was thus shadowed forth, and a dream rather than a reality. And what Cresson is pointing out here is that in that brief 200 years time span, a shared peasant crucified by the Roman Empire, his followers ended up in this Roman imperial court of power. And his closing line in here is saying that Christianity has never dealt with that movement, the preferential option for the rich, shall we say, and powerful. And not that they're outside of the love of God, but it certainly is telling. And so I just find it a struggle here in these modern days of 2020 to see the powerful continue, the abuse continue, and the getting away with it